The Chicago Blackhawks nab Andre Burakovsky from the Seattle Kraken. I'll talk through why this is a good buy low spot on Burakovsky.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and give me a follow on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to check out my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. But happy Monday, everyone. Hope everyone out there found a way to battle through the blazing hot temperatures that we've been facing in the Chicagoland area these last few days. High up into the 90s, it's like all of a sudden summer is, bam, just smacking us square in the face. So I hope you all found a way to stay cool throughout the course of this weekend. But what a weekend it was for our Chicago Blackhawks, making a couple of different moves that I definitely got to talk through to open things up on the show here this week. The first of which, acquiring 30-year-old winger Andre Burakovsky from the Seattle Kraken in a one-for-one swap for Joe Veleno, which I think is pretty much a no-brainer win here for the Blackhawks, even though it has been kind of a struggle for Burakovsky these last few seasons. The first reason why I really like this acquisition for the Hawks is because Burakovsky brings size and skill to the table. And that's something, as I've been outspoken about on this podcast for seemingly forever, that's just been something the Blackhawks have been missing in their forward group for far too long, and was a reason why I thought they could possibly go after Mason Marchment in the trade market last week. That obviously didn't wind up happening, as funny enough, he got traded to the Seattle Kraken, but the Blackhawks get a player in a very similar mold here in Andre Burakovsky, that he's 6'3", 203 pounds, and plays on the wing. Checks a lot of boxes that the Blackhawks have been missing, and he spent the last 3 years playing for the Seattle Kraken, has 2 years left on his current deal with a $5.5 million cap hit, which, to call a spade, is not a good contract, but it's also the reason why the Blackhawks were able to get him so cheap and why it only cost them Joe Veleno. But it has been a little bit of a struggle for Burakovsky these last 3 years with the Kraken. He played in just 49 games in both the 2022-23 season and the 23-24 campaign, the latter of which he only produced 16 points, 9 goals, and 7 assists. And even this past year, while he was able to stay healthy, suiting up in 79 of the Kraken's 82 games, he still only produced 37 points, with 10 of them coming from goals. So it hasn't been the typical Andre Burakovsky productivity with the Seattle Kraken, but he's not that far removed from an excellent season in his final year with the Colorado Avalanche to help them win the Stanley Cup in 2022, his second Stanley Cup championship, by the way. That year, Burakovsky potted 22 goals and added 39 assists for 61 points, while mostly playing on the Avalanche third line, truly looking like one of the better offensive third line players in the entire league, but just hasn't been able to produce at the same rate ever being with Seattle. I do think, from what I've kind of read into, I don't know if Dave Hackstall's system, he was the head coach for Seattle the first 2 years that Burakovsky was there. I don't know if that system necessarily benefited his particular skill set. Then there was just kind of the situation with Seattle this year and Dan Bilesma. Nothing ever seemed to go right. So I really do believe this is a good buy low spot for the Blackhawks, and Burakovsky coming to Chicago gives him a really good bounce back opportunity this upcoming season. And I really like this move by the Blackhawks, even with Burakovsky having a poor contract. It's not something that's really going to matter to them all that much. You know, I would have preferred this to be an expiring deal, Blackhawks fans. So, you know, maybe Burakovsky doesn't jam up a spot in the middle six that maybe could go to one of these young kids. But at the same point in time, I was looking at the Blackhawks Puckpedia, RIP to Cap Friendly, one of the best websites ever. I was looking at the Blackhawks Puckpedia, and they're still going to have guys like Jason Dickinson, Nick Foligno, Ilya Mikheyev. All three, I would say, are at least fairly likely not going to sign on with the Blackhawks when their contracts expire. So there is still going to be some opening going on in the Blackhawks forward group. Again, I would have preferred it to be 1 year, but it's not the end of the world being for 2. And worst case, Ontario, if Burakovsky does stink up the joint this season, the Blackhawks still could go and try to trade him next summer or at next year's trade deadline, and they'll be able to retain some of that salary considering it is an expiring contract. So Burakovsky bringing size and skill to the Blackhawks middle six, something I've talked about them needing for a while. I definitely like that aspect that he brings to the table, and I really do believe with Chicago being now a team that will have more pace in their forward group with all of these young kids being on the scene, that's going to benefit someone like Andre Burakovsky, who can skate well and produces a lot of his production off of the rush. I think coming into a system like Chicago where he's going to get opportunities, he'll probably get some power play chances. Not sure if it'll be top power play or second unit, but he'll likely be getting some time on the man advantage. I do think there's a good chance that Burakovsky bounces back this season with the Blackhawks. And again, it basically costs them nothing in return, right? Joe Veleno looked okay in his 18 games that he spent with the Hawks after being acquired at the trade deadline from the Detroit Red Wings. He had 3 goals and 4 assists for 7 points in those 18 games. Looked all right in a, fourth line, bottom 6-ish type of role. But I also don't think he necessarily did anything to get himself over the hump or cement himself a job for this upcoming season. And because he has a $2.28 million cap hit for this year, there was even some talks that the Blackhawks could have possibly bought him out this summer. So to get Andre Burakovsky out of that in exchange, it's a no-brainer win here for the Blackhawks. Seattle gets their cap space that they were looking for, and the Blackhawks undoubtedly get the better player while Andre Burakovsky gets a new opportunity in a new organization. So I think this was a really savvy trade. Good buy low spot by general manager Kyle Davidson. I'm sure there are some people out there saying, oh, well, Veleno, we got an exchange for Mrazek, and that we didn't necessarily maximize the return for Mrazek. So be it. I still think Andre Burakovsky, we'll see what he provides here in Chicago, but I just think this was a no-brainer buy low spot on Burakovsky. The second move that the Blackhawks made over the weekend that I got to get into here real quick, not surprising whatsoever, was buying out defenseman TJ Brodie. It's finally over, Blackhawks fans. He ended up playing in only 54 games for the Hawks, recording 2 goals and 8 assists for 10 points. Never really finding his footing on the back end, just mostly being a pylon in the defensive zone. It was not very good. And the 2-year contract that GM Kyle Davidson gave him last summer at $3.75 million, I mean, I didn't like it at the time. 2 years seemed bananas then, but it definitely seems bananas now. One of the worst, maybe even the worst contract that general manager Kyle Davidson has given out so far in his tenure. But TJ Brodie can't be hurting us anymore, Blackhawks fans. He will, though, still be on the books for this upcoming season at $3.23 million, and then again in the 26-27 campaign, but only for $258,000. So probably the smarter decision instead of continuing to let TJ Brodie plague our blue line. But those are the 2 moves that the Blackhawks made from over the weekend. Make sure to give me your 2 cents on both of them down below in the comments section. But coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, make sure to stick with me as I'll dive into daily faceoffs, top summer trade targets that could interest the Blackhawks this summer. But first, I do need to talk to you all real quick about Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, then go and crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. And Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with fiber to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And who doesn't love a good pistachio? I know I certainly do. I could sit there literally eating them and cracking them all day long. And that satisfying feeling of opening each shell, it's like a perfect mini snack meditation. And whether you're dropping off the kids at school or running between meetings, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com in order to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com to check it out today. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before I get into segment 2, a quick reminder to please go and hit that like button and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. If you enjoy what you're watching here today, or if you enjoy what you're listening to, please make sure to rate and review the podcast, preferably with a 5-star rating. Those are always great, all of which is 100% free, won't cost you anything, and helps me out in a massive way in growing my platform. Segment 2 on today's show, though, we've seen the Blackhawks already involved in a couple of trades here this offseason, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them get in maybe 1 or 2 more as the offseason starts to get into its nitty-gritty here this week. Draft week, free agency right after. And with that being the case, I figured it would make sense to go through Daily Faceoff's summer trade target list and talk about which players, if any, could make sense for the Blackhawks to pursue via the trade market. Before I go into that, though, Blackhawks fans, one thing I did want to point out. After acquiring Andre Burakovsky from the Seattle Kraken, well, I guess, Joe Veleno maybe would have been a fringe roster guy. Regardless, though, now that we know we've acquired Andre Burakovsky from the Seattle Kraken, just taking a look at this Blackhawks forward group that they have right here, right now. And again, I know a lot of things can change before the season gets going in the fall, right? We still got to go through training camp. There's still going to be those battles. We don't know what free agency is going to look like. But just from afar, right here, right now, Blackhawks fans, taking a look at this forward group, there are 14 bodies who I think you could call NHLers at this point in time. And the reason I bring that up is it's just starting to get a little bit crowded here in this Blackhawks forward group. In the way that I kind of see it at this point in time, if they are going to make a trade or if they are going to pursue someone in free agency, first and foremost, just because of the defensive situation, I don't really expect the Blackhawks to be going after a defenseman in the trade or free agent market. This summer, it feels like it's about the forward group, and we've seen that with Ryan Donato being brought back. We've already seen that with Andre Burakovsky acquired here. But at this point, considering what the Blackhawks forward group looks like, what it's made up of at this point in time, I feel like they have one more addition, and even if they do have one more addition, there might be one body who has to go here in this forward group for the numbers to kind of make sense. But again, I'm projecting very far out from the regular season. We don't know what these training camp battles are going to look like. We don't know if guys like Lynden Lakovic or Colton Dach, Ryan Green are going to do enough to be NHLers come opening night for the Blackhawks. So there is still a lot of time and a lot of things can change. But it is definitely something to keep in mind. Just looking at this forward group, I would imagine, in the bottom 6, they're going to give Oliver Moore, Ryan Green, Slager, Dach. They're going to be giving those guys all the opportunity in the world to make the team out of training camp. So to me, it kind of feels like if the Blackhawks are going to be making another move here this summer, it's probably one more guy inside of the top 6, one guy that they're looking at in particular. And maybe that one guy could be coming from Daily Faceoff summer trade list. And maybe it's the number one guy that Daily Faceoff has on their summer trade target list. And that is none other than 23-year-old winger JJ Peterka, who, of course, I've talked about on the show here already. There's been lots of chatter around his name over these past few weeks, and rightfully so. I think he's earned this number 1 spot in the Daily Faceoff summer trade target board because of the incredible year that he had last season with the Buffalo Sabres. 68 points, 27 goals, and 41 assists in 77 games. He's potted 28 goals each of the last 2 seasons, has pretty much cemented himself as a top liner, if not a top 6er at the stage of his career, but is a pending restricted free agent, and there's been some ruffling of the feathers between he and the Buffalo Sabres. And Frank Saravalli of Daily Faceoff had this to write about Peterka, saying, quote, "There may be no better player available, period, on the trade market this summer, let alone one of Peterka's age," close quote, which is important because as I outlined with the Blackhawks, there's rumors around them and the number 3 overall pick. Sounds like they'd only be trading back if it would be in exchange for a young, productive player right here, right now. JJ Peterka is one of the only guys that I feel like fits that bill. So definitely going to be interested to see if the Blackhawks can make an aggressive run at Peterka. The problem that I outlined last week is the Sabres apparently want NHL help in return, and I just don't know if there's necessarily someone on the Blackhawks that they'd be willing to get rid of in order to acquire JJ Peterka. But according to Saravalli, according to numerous different sources, the Blackhawks are in the mix for Peterka, along with the Rangers, the Islanders, the Lightning, and the Vancouver Canucks. But Saravalli also mentioned that they are not alone. There are a lot of interested suitors for JJ Peterka, but he is definitely one of the players that would make sense for the Blackhawks to acquire in a trade. We'll see if that actually winds up happening for Buffalo. Seems like it's expected to be the case, but you never know at this point in time. But Peterka is definitely a player on this list who makes sense for the Blackhawks to pursue. At number 2, another interesting name who I've talked about on the show this summer, it's Marco Rossi of the Minnesota Wild, 23 years old, another young skill player that would make sense for the Blackhawks to acquire in the trade market. He had 60 points, 24 goals, and 36 assists in 82 games for the Minnesota Wild last year. Was excellent without Kirill Kaprizov, but then in the postseason, suddenly had his role demoted, and during his postseason presser, when asked if he'll be back with Minnesota, he had to say, I don't know, we'll see. So definitely some smoke there between Rossi and Minnesota. The problem with Rossi and the Blackhawks is Scott Powers of The Athletic has already poured some cold water on this idea, and it was something that I mentioned on the show. For Rossi in particular, it just, again, I think it's probably too many undersized players at the center ice position at this point in time, and he's already 23 years old. Like, yes, he definitely would be a help in the skill department, but I don't know necessarily if that's what the Blackhawks are trying to go and get in the trade market. It feels like, again, if they wanted Marco Rossi, they would probably have more interest in James Hagan this summer. That's a completely different conversation, but if they would have interest in James Hagens, I feel like they'd have interest in Marco Rossi, and they just reportedly don't have interest in Rossi. And that one, I do understand more so than James Hagens, because there's different options for the Blackhawks in this market compared to the NHL draft. Number 3, Bowen Byram. Again, don't think the Blackhawks are going to be going after a defenseman this summer. K'Andre Miller's number 4 here on the daily faceoff trade target list. Jonathan Marchessault at number 5. Did not have a great first season with the Nashville Predators. Did have 56 points, 21 goals, and 35 assists in 78 games. But given that he's 34 years old and has 4 years left on his current contract, don't see the Blackhawks being all that interested in him. Don't really see them having interest in Evander Kane. Rasmus Anderson, defenseman. That doesn't really make sense. Jean-Gabriel Pageau, 1 year left at $5 million. That's really the only part of his makeup that would make sense. I don't think the Blackhawks would like to bring in another undersized old skill guy. John Gibson, goaltender. Obviously, the Blackhawks aren't going to be in on him. Charlie Coyle, kind of interesting because he only has 1 year left at $5.25 million, but not really enough of a needle mover to me. Number 11 is an interesting one. The rights to Isaac Howard, 21 years old, Hobey Baker winner last year for Michigan State, 52 points, 26 goals, 26 assists in 37 games. There's obviously a rift between he and the Lightning, and seems likely that the Lightning are going to move him at some point in time. You don't really just want to lose him for nothing in exchange, and it doesn't seem like Howard is all that thrilled with Tampa Bay at this point. This is one that I do think would make sense for the Blackhawks more so than Marco Rossi, because Isaac Howard is probably going to be a winger at the next level, and the Blackhawks could certainly use more skill on the wing. Howard is a little bit bigger than Marco Rossi. Rossi's just a really undersized center, so that's what makes it hard there. Isaac Howard's the younger of the two. I don't think he would be as expensive because Rossi's obviously more proven as an NHLer. Isaac Howard, I think, could legitimately be in play for the Blackhawks if they can make a serviceable enough deal to the Tampa Bay Lightning. I've already been outspoken about that here this summer. Vladimir Tarasenko at number 12. I cannot imagine that man in a Blackhawks sweater. That would pain my eyes, I think, more than Corey Perry. 14, Brian Rust. 65 points in 71 games last year for the Penguins, 31 goals and 34 assists. The problem is he's 33 years old and has 3 years left on his contract, so I don't see that really being interesting for the Blackhawks. Number 15, Connor Murphy, first member of the Blackhawks to be on Daily Faceoff summer trade target list. 32-year-old defenseman had 19 points, 2 goals, and 17 assists in 68 games with the Blackhawks last year, and is entering the final year of his current deal with a $4.4 million cap hit. I don't think the Blackhawks are wanting to trade Connor Murphy before the start of this season. I think they'd have to be absolutely wowed to move him. I still think they want him around as the veteran on the right-hand side to help in the development of guys like Sam Rinzel and Artem Levshinov, who are going to be the future RHDs for the Blackhawks. Wouldn't be surprised, though, to see Connor Murphy trade talks really start to ramp up at the trade deadline, especially if, Rinzel and Levshinov are looking capable of handling the blue line themselves. Number 16, Matias Maccelli, I think is an interesting name here. 24 years old, looked like one of the more promising young players in the league a couple of years ago when the organization was still with Arizona, but with Utah this past season, did not have a very good year. 18 points, 8 goals, and 10 assists in 55 games. This was a guy a couple of years ago who was moving his way into the top 6 for a young Coyotes bunch, and then was getting healthy scratched a decently amount this season for the Utah Mammoth, and has 1 year left on his current deal at $3.425 million. I don't think it would probably cost a ton to go and acquire Maccelli from the Mammoth. Feels like it could be another nice change of scenery type deal, but I don't know necessarily if he's, enough of a needle mover like someone of Isaac Howard's stature or JJ Peterka, obviously, for the Blackhawks to actually go and want to bring in another body to this forward group. But I did think he was an interesting name. I do think Victor Arvidsson is somewhat of an interesting name, although now that they brought in Burakovsky, I think bringing in another middle sixer doesn't really make that much sense, right? That's why I'm saying at this point, if the Blackhawks are going to bring in another body, it would be for someone like JJ Peterka, a young guy who can go and play on that top line. Because I just don't think they want to waste space on any of these older guys clogging up a spot for one of their young, promising forwards. But before acquiring Burakovsky, I think Victor Arvidsson would have been interesting after having a down year with the Edmonton Oilers. 15 goals and 12 assists in 67 games. 1 year left at $4 million. But the opportunity to go and acquire Arvidsson is probably gone at this point. Last player I wanted to bring up from this trade target list is Blackhawks forward Lukas Reichel, 23-year-old who had 22 points, 8 goals, and 14 assists in 70 games for the Blackhawks last year. 1 year left on his current deal at $1.2 million. And again, the real reason I wanted to bring this up is because from what I said off the jump here in segment 2, if the Blackhawks, even if they do bring in another body in the top 6, it feels like maybe someone else would have to go. And Lukas Reichel is definitely one of the few guys who I feel like is likely to get traded. And just even, I was going through the Blackhawks projected forward group for this next season, and I want Lukas Reichel to get an opportunity. I really hope Jeff Blashill gives him an opportunity here because he just hasn't gotten that these last few seasons. But if they come into training camp with their minds made up already about Lukas Reichel, it's kind of almost like, why haven't we traded him at this point in time? If they're not going to give him that top 6 opportunity at some point, just to even see what he can do, I feel like as a last-ditch opportunity here in Chicago, you'd want to give him that opportunity. But again, that hasn't really played out these last couple of seasons. I do think there is a decent possibility of Lukas Reichel getting traded. Just because, again, if you're not going to give him an opportunity here, I don't really know what good keeping him around in the bottom 6. I don't really know what good that is going to do. But I did think it was interesting that Reichel found his way on this trade list along with Connor Murphy. Of all the players on this list, again, I think the only ones that really make sense, JJ Peterka, of course, as I've already broken down. I've also already had an episode this summer talking about the rights to Isaac Howard. I think that makes sense. Matias Maccelli, maybe, but outside of that, no one else really on this trade target list, I think, is someone the Chicago Blackhawks are going to pursue. We'll see what winds up happening with the offseason really getting into full steam here as it's draft week. We're just over 1 week removed from the start of free agency. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of craziness going around across the league, but there are my full thoughts on Daily Faceoff Summer Trade Targets list to keep an eye on coming up in just a moment. Before I close out today's episode, still have to get into Lynden Lakovic's 2025 NHL Draft Profile. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Summer sports are now in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not just make it a little bit more thrilling? It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. And are you new to FanDuel? Well, that's perfect because new customers can bet just $5 and will win $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon in order to get started. Again, download the FanDuel app and open it up today or go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to go and get started. Thank you all for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can now find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, as draft week has finally arrived, we keep the prospect profiles rolling here on the show. Next up is 18-year-old forward Lynden Lakovic, 6'4", 190 pounds, turned 18 back in December. So a little bit on the older side of this year's draft class, but has spent the last 3 seasons playing for the Moose Jaw Warriors of the WHL, helping them win the WHL championship in the 23-24 campaign. This past season, he recorded 58 points, 27 goals, and 31 assists in 47 games. Did miss about a month and a half due to injury, but when he was healthy, super productive and had a nice uptick in his production after recording 39 points, 18 goals, and 21 assists in 68 games the year prior. And had he have been able to play, the full season, probably looking at a 35 to 40 goal campaign out of Lynden Lakovic. But a reminder to check out some of the other prospect profiles that I've gone through here as of late, such as Victor Eklund, Justin Cabinot, Brady Martin, Jake O'Brien, and I know these are players expected to go in the range beyond the Blackhawks, but you never know what's going to happen when GM KD is calling the shots, right? There have been rumors of the Blackhawks trading back from number 3, and I think there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to be selecting at number 25 with their second first-round selection. I'd say odds are there's a decent chance of Kyle Davidson moving up from there as well. So even if it's not a player in the projected range of where the Blackhawks select, still want to be going over all of these prospects real briefly. And a reminder to be on the lookout for a show dropping later this week where I go through all the prospects projected to go in the latter half of the first round that I'd be interested to see the Blackhawks taking at number 25. But as far as the rankings go here, for Lynden Lakovic, a very polarizing prospect, which always makes things interesting. At number 14, Elite Prospects has Lakovic ranked number 14. Bob McKenzie has him ranked 20th. Craig Button has him ranked 23rd. But then, in typical Tony Ferrari fashion, I told you he always goes against the grain, I swear. He's the highest of anyone on Lakovic and is actually the only one to have him ranked inside the top 10, coming in at number 8. Then McKean's Hockey has Lakovic ranked 13th. Chris Peters has him ranked 18th. Daily Faceoff, the lowest on Lakovic of the group, has him ranked 25th. So maybe he will be available when the Blackhawks are on the clock. While the Dobber Prospects has him ranked 10th, and the Hockey News has him ranked 13th. So kind of all over the board here for Lynden Lakovic. And when watching his highlights, when watching his game tape, I kind of understand why, because there are things to like about his game, but there are other spots where you most certainly can critique. But the number one strength, the number one thing that stands out to me when watching Lynden Lakovic is that he's a big boy with a big shot. I think there's a very good chance his goal scoring is going to be the best attribute at the NHL level. Really good power on his shot, dominant scorer on the power play. Like if you give him open looks from that right dot, he's going to beat most goaltenders in that league. Really good accuracy, high glove, low glove, blocker low. Love to see that diversity out of shooters. Again, I think that will allow them to have more opportunities, and just having that diverse scoring ability will help you in many ways when you get to that next level instead of just having that one typical spot that you go to time and time again. But I do really like Lynden Lakovic's shot, one of the better shots in the entire draft class. And what's interesting, this can be a strength or a weakness depending on how you want to look at it. But I got to say, of all the goal scorers I've seen this year, I don't know if many have scored more off of just a curl and drag wrister than Lynden Lakovic. Like he scores a lot of goals from just beating goaltenders cleanly, which, I love the shot, but I wish he also had a little bit more, given his size. I wish he was able to score in tight a little bit better. But I'll get to that in just a moment here. Definitely another one of Lakovic's strengths, though, in addition to his size and his goal scoring ability, is he does have high hockey IQ. And I think he works really well off of the rush, has good give and go passes. He's a capable passer. He has good vision, good playmaking ability. It's nothing crazy, but he reads the ice and anticipates plays really well. And knows how to move himself around in transition to get himself open and also find open teammates as well. Definitely something that was noticeable about his game, as well as his ability to shield the puck. Love this about Lynden Lakovic, able to lower that shoulder already at a young age and know how to protect the puck. He has some soft hands to go along with it too, capable of making some nice plays from out in tight. But I love that he already knows he has an advantage down low and along the boards and in those battles, and he uses it to his advantage. And then overall, he's just a big human being for an 18-year-old kid, 6'4", and it feels like he's still kind of growing into that body, and it's going to take some time for him to get up to like full strength, as he's apparently had a big growth spurt since joining the WHL. But 6'4" at 18, I mean, with a good offensive makeup, you just don't see that happen all that often. But as far as the weaknesses for Lynden Lakovic, there are definitely things to break down here. Number one is that he kind of has some limited mobility, not atypical of a big player, right? Like it takes him a little while to get going. His top speed is decent, but I don't think he's got the skating ability of another big boy like Roger McQueen. And he's a little bit more awkward and gangly out there, I feel like, at times. I've heard scouts and analysts say, again, he's still growing into his body, still figuring out how to work those big feet of his. When he does, people say he's got some good skating ability, but I'm a little bit concerned about that part of his game. And then also, for being a guy who's 6'4", he's really not the feistiest of players out there. And I definitely think he needs to be more consistent and add more jam, or at least be more consistent with the sandpaper style game that, NHL, whatever team takes him, is probably going to want to add that to his game, right? For a kid who is 6'4", like, you want him to be a little bit more meat and potatoes than he is. So that is something that he has to work on. Not necessarily a power forward, despite having a power forward build. Definitely needs to get stronger as well. Needs to get up over 200 pounds at his size. And then the one real question I have about Lynden Lakovic is, what's the upside outside of the goal scoring? Like, not super feisty, not the best defensive player, not the best passer. Like, outside of goal scoring, I just don't know if there's enough here that necessarily moves the needle to me. But again, I know there are a lot of people who love Lynden Lakovic and feel like when he does fill out that frame, he's going to be a real problem to work with. I'm not as high on him as others. I just kind of see him as, a pretty standard middle six winger who can go and score on the power play. I'm just struggling to see other parts of his game that are going to really thrive in the NHL, but maybe I'm wrong about Lynden Lakovic. But I understand kind of why in the middle teens he's been falling a little bit. Well, who I'm going to cover tomorrow, Carter Bear, his stock has been rising over these last couple of weeks. So there's my breakdown on Lynden Lakovic. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Until the next episode, everyone, hope you all stay cool. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.